The setting in the poem, as you heard when Linda read it, is springtime, when the earth is young and fertile, and its inhabitants are sowing their oats, meeting lovers in the garden. Only shockingly, in the poem, the pursuer is God. God is our lover, hanging out just beyond our wall, gazing in at us through the windows, trying to capture our attention. Now, I don't know about you, but I come from the Puritan part of the UCC. We don't talk publicly about these kinds of things, and certainly not in church. The God that I tend to imagine is more intellectual, more reserved, loving but demanding, more like a parent, keeping an appropriate distance. So the Song of Solomon is a bit unsettling. God as our lover, calling out to us, "Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away." So I'm going to chicken out and balance it with the gospel. The gospel text actually makes a great companion. And so listen for the word of God. Now, when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked Jesus, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but rather eat with defiled hands?" Jesus said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines.'" And then Jesus goes on to say, "You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition." Let this rest on our hearts this day as we consider God's holy word. Amen. Bernie and I were watching a movie recently. It wasn't a very good movie, so I won't recommend it. But part of the side story in the movie was about a pill you could take, and it would make you feel like you were falling in love again. People went crazy for this drug. It became the new heroin. Kind of understandable if you remember what it was like when you were first falling in love. My sister still teases me about it, about those early days when Bernie and I were dating. I don't remember this, but she says that I would call her and go on and on about my new boyfriend. Bernie says this, and Bernie does that. I do remember that it was hard to concentrate on anything else. It felt like my feet were a little off the ground and my head in the clouds. I was irrationally happy all the time. Do you remember that? Well, it's been 10 years now. I still like Bernie quite a lot, but it's different. These days, my feet are firmly planted on the earth because they're so busy running around doing all the things I have to do. My head is not filled with the clouds of love, but with a long list of things to accomplish. I guess you could say that we've become more practical about our relationship. We're less obsessed with one another and more consumed with the ordinary demands of life. Sometimes I admit I take our love for granted. I don't always pay attention to our relationship the way I should, the way I did in the early days. And that's what I think the gospel lesson is about this morning, and what makes it a great companion to the love song of Solomon. In Mark's account, we find Jesus confronting the scribes and the Pharisees, who were the most religious Jews of the first century. These pious folks had forgotten their once passionate love of God. They were devoted instead to a long and weary list of religious law. It's difficult to fault them. They were the people of the book, and the laws were right there, written down in their holy book. They could certainly make a good case that some of the disciples of Jesus were not following the Jewish religious law. But Jesus wasn't buying any of it. Jesus was a Jewish man who loved God more than he loved Judaism. I'm going to say that again so that you get it. Jesus was a Jew who loved God more than he loved Judaism. He was a mystic. And the mystics don't give a whit about religion, about rituals and rules. Jesus loved God. And his passion for God was evident in his compassion for others, for all of those who came to him with their hunger, with their pain, with their longing. But all the scribes and Pharisees could see was this: they didn't wash their hands before they ate. It would be silly if it weren't so sad. It would be laughable if we didn't do the same thing. I wonder if we don't sometimes love the church more than we love God. Do we find ourselves defending human principles in order to protect our institutions, even at the expense of compassion and generosity toward others? It seems to me that the Christian church has become quite Pharisaic. It's probably why our numbers are declining. I know there's not very many young people sitting in my classes that are interested in ritual and rules. They're looking for hope. But consumed by our institutions, we've forgotten what it's like to be swept up by God. I wish there was a pill we could take for it. I wish there was a way for the church to bend more deeply toward love. I would have this was historically a problem in Christianity. We've always been a people devoted to. But a little research revealed something extraordinary. I learned that in the Middle Ages, there were more Christian commentaries written on the Song of Solomon than on any other Old Testament text. They called it the Song of Songs. The important song of all is the Song of Love. It was the mystics who gave it all this attention. They found great spiritual strength in this rather erotic poem. It echoed their own longing for God, the soul's yearning to be united with the divine. Bernard of Clairvaux, a Cistercian monk, composed 86 sermons for his community based on the Song of Solomon. He believed this song could help us rediscover the power of God's love. And in doing so, we could restore our own ability to be generous in our love for one another. God is reaching for us, Bernard taught. When we receive God's kiss, we are transformed. Teresa of Avila was the first woman to write a commentary on the Song of Solomon. She observed, "We practice so poorly the love of God." Then she surmised that when we marry God, understand ourselves as God's spouse, God's partner in this work, then love becomes part of everything that we do. It's our very breath. We find we can do nothing apart from love. It's also worth noting here that one of the theologians of the Inquisitions commanded that Teresa's meditation on the Song of Songs be burned. Violence and judgment cannot tolerate the gaze of love. Why is this so difficult for us? Why are we more inclined to law than to love? According to the Song of Solomon, God stands out there behind our wall, calling to us. It's not God's wall that separates us, according to the poem, but our wall. What is this wall that we've built that prevents God's approach? It can be a lot of things, I guess. Fear, anger, hard-heartedness, arrogance. For me, I think my wall is control. Love, if you think about it, seems so out of control. I equate human love with emotion, irrational thinking, a kind of lawlessness and a lack of order. It feels chaotic to me. I like order, so I prefer rules. Rules provide boundaries for us, expectations. I like to keep the rules, and then I can measure myself and know how I'm doing. But if I'm honest, rules also give me a way to keep score. I can evaluate all of you, see how well you're obeying the rules. Sheep over here, goats over there. Winners and losers, good and evil, right and wrong. But if I'm brutally honest, when I begin to measure like this, sooner or later, I'm going to end up on the wrong side of that moral line. As St. Paul lamented, I do not do the good that I want to do. Instead, I do the evil that I do not want to do. It is impossible for any of us to be good enough to follow the rules. So if God is that great impartial judge and rule keeper, that distant intellectual I say I prefer God to be, I'm doomed. All of us scribes and Pharisees, all of us rule makers and rule keepers and rule breakers are doomed. We have no chance. But what if, as the Song of Songs says, God is more like a lover, chasing after us, calling out to us? What if God has already made the judgment, made the decision, and chosen us? What if God just plain loves us? It's completely irrational, isn't it? But that's what Jesus knew. What Jesus knew and the Pharisees did not. That the law of love is the most powerful law of all. Love, as they say, isn't just the main thing, it's the only thing. The only thing that gives meaning to life. Love is the pure identity of God. And it's our pure identity. It's who we were created to be. When we love, we are most like God. We are our best selves. It's probably why we'd like to distill all of that into a pill that we could take. Of course, the love of God is much more than a feeling. Real love is the everyday stuff, the hard work. It's more than just those first few weeks of emotion. It's 10 years later, and 30 years, and 60 years later, when life has gotten busy and complicated, and sometimes confusing and scary. It is love that is steadfast. Love is patient. God standing on the other side of all of these walls we build, and yet standing there and calling to us again and again. Love is passion turned into compassion. God breaking down those walls of fear and control. It's welcoming into the community those who are altogether unlovable, who do not wash their hands or do not accept our rituals or our Christian judgments. Love is courage. It is the strength to stand, sometimes even against our own ungodly rules. But it's the only thing that can save us. God's love. One last thought. When Jesus confronted the scribes and the Pharisees, he used their own teachings against them. Quoting from the prophet Isaiah, who was speaking for God, he said, "This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." I sometimes wonder if that isn't an accurate description of all religion. That we put together a system for honoring God with our words and our rituals and our customs in exchange for the real work of loving God and loving one another. Religion itself becomes the wall between us and God. Jesus was a Jew who loved God more than he loved Judaism. Maybe it's time for Christians to love God more than we love Christianity, more than we love our churches, more than we love our doctrines and our rules and our laws. Maybe it's just time for us to love God more. Amen.